I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, how are you today?
Hey Jeff, I'm doing great and ready to dive into more C.S. Lewis. Let's get started.
All right, yeah, let's get started, Robot Lady. We find ourselves in the year 1922, late 1922, December to be precise. Lewis has just turned 24 years old. He is a student at Oxford. He's in his third term. He's now studying English there. And he is living with Mrs. Moore and her daughter, and they are always continually on the lookout for the next best rental home or property to live in, as they are essentially living, quote, paycheck to paycheck, although none of them has a paycheck. Stand by for just a second, Robot Lady. I got to check on something here. But before I do, good morning, Nita Latte. Welcome. Good to see you as usual. Robot Lady, welcome, Nita Latte.
Good morning, Netta Latte. Great to have you here again. Jeff, I'm all set whenever you're ready.
All right, hang on for 1 second. I got to check on something here. Actually, I will be right back. Stand by. Okay, we're back and ready to go. Sorry about that. I see you in the chat as well, Ron. Welcome. Glad to have you here, Robot Lady. Welcome, Ron.
Hey Ron, welcome. Great to have you with us today.
All right, let's just dive right in. Saturday, December 16th, 1922. He says, a raw, wet day. I spent the morning doing Virgil with Maureen. She was extraordinarily stupid and seemed to be making no effort, which I suppose is always the teacher's fault in some way, though I can't quite see where I fail, so that's interesting. At 12 o'clock, I set out for Forest Hill. That's where Aunt Lily is staying at a college, or cottage, not college. Aunt Lily combined cooking and philosophy, and we did not lunch until 3:30. Off chops and a capital plum pudding, which she had bought at Buol's, Buols. Either that's a town or some type of store, I'm not sure. I found her very tedious today, he says. Though I like enthusiasm, one gets desperately tired of a fixed circle of ideas. I like enthusiasm, one gets desperately tired of fixed circle ideas. Okay. She pays for her depth by narrowness. It was all the old business today. Shakespeare, praised not as a great poet, but as a kind of monstrosity of intuition. The inevitable Emerson, the élan vital, the, quote, exchange of differences, heroism, and the forward plunge. Sorry, robot lady, I'm a little distracted here because part of the reason that I paused is because Lucy was desperate and crying to get into the office today, so I let her in the door. Right now she's rubbing her face on the microphone. You might be able to hear that. But robot lady, go ahead and comment on anything that you've heard me read so far or anything you've heard me say about Lucy.
Sounds like C.S. Lewis was having a mixed day. The bit about Maureen's effort reflects his concern as a teacher, while Aunt Lily's fixed ideas seem to test his patience. Also, Lucy's mic rubs add a charming touch to the stream.
All right, well, thank you for that note of positivity, robot lady. Let's take the optimistic approach, shall we? Okay, there was one inexplicable anecdote. This is Aunt Lily, had been held up by a crush of proms, Prams, at Carfax, and we had asked one obstructive woman to take her prom off the pavement. Now, I'm going to pause here for just a second, robot lady. Can you tell us what a prom is in England? Something that a woman might be obstructing the pavement with, Pram.
Sure, a pram in England refers to a baby carriage or stroller. So Aunt Lily was likely referring to someone blocking the way with a baby carriage.
Okay, thank you for that, because I had never heard that term used before. So it's a baby carriage that we're talking about here. All right, let's pick back up. The woman replied that she had a right to be there. Aunt Lily reported that she had no right to bring these children into the world for other people to look after, and still less to block up the pavement. The woman said she was shopping. Aunt Lily said it was bad for the child to be taken shopping, and the only good thing was that it killed some of them off. Lewis says, I asked her why on earth she said such a thing. She replied, I was angry. And then I replied, Lewis says, quoting Plato, that anger was an aggravation, not an excuse. And she added that she had a lot of leaflets issued by the CBC. This is a place called the Constructive Birth Control. And she was going to drop one into every prom, every baby carriage, the next time she went into Oxford, which would indeed be a good joke, but I don't think she saw it that way. Robot lady, tell us a little bit more about this organization, the Constructive Birth Control, back in 1922 in England.
So, the Society for Constructive Birth Control, founded by Marie Stopes, focused on birth control education and family planning. Stopes was a prominent advocate for reproductive rights during that era.
All right, thank you, robot lady. Lewis continues, lunch was a slow business, and after lunch, tea a slower, so that it was after 5 before I knew. I then left her, and I walked home. It was almost quite dark, with wind in the trees and a little gray light shot over hill. It was like plunging into a cool bath after all this afternoon's jargon. What I can't stand about her, Aunt Lily, is that she knows everything. The Holy Ghost discusses all his plans with her, and she was on the committee that arranged creation. That's a pretty funny commentary. Seems that Lewis is a little irritated with Aunt Lily. Robot Lady.
Yeah, he's definitely venting. It's amusing how he expresses his frustrations with her fixed views. Lewis's humor adds some lightness to the situation.
All right, he says, I reached home shortly before 7 to find the doc, Mary, and the brat here, and Dee rather worried as she had expected me earlier. The doc is to vaccinate us all tomorrow. I can't remember who he's referring to when he says the brat here, and I'm not expecting you to remember, Robot Lady. It's been a while. I think your memory is several months behind where we are here in the diary, and again, that's not your fault that you're maxed out on your memory. Anyway, it's a different story. So, Nidalate, if you happen to remember who he's referring to here as the brat, or even you, Ron, feel free to drop something in the chat, or anybody else that's watching. Yeah, Robot Lady, any thoughts on that? Who he might be referring to as the brat here?
Given the context, the brat might be a nickname for Maureen, or another young person in their household. Lewis often used playful language for family members.
Oh, that's a good point. I had missed that he didn't mention Maureen there in the sentence, so it's probably who he's talking about. Taking in the fact that in this diary entry he said she was rather stupid at her Latin lesson earlier that day. So maybe that's who he was talking about. Well, no, because here he says Maureen came in with the news that Mr. Raymond, who is leaving for a job at Watford, is proposing to rent out his house, Hillsborough, unless he gets a good offer of purchase, and was surprised that we hadn't made an offer. I am to go and see him about it in the morning. I suppose it is a wild goose chase like all the rest. So here I could be interpreting his phrasing, Maureen came in with the news that Mr. Raymond, ... I might be misinterpreting that as she came into the room after everyone was there, or if he was just saying she was sitting there the whole time, but then she began speaking, and that's what he means by came in. So perhaps he is referring to her as the brat. And Nidalate, I see you're wondering if Maureen ever read his diary. I doubt it. I doubt he ever read it where she could hear it, because she was still a child at this stage and also taking lessons from her. So I would anticipate that he wouldn't have read it to her, but I might be disproven as we continue to read through these entries and learn more surprising things.
That's a fair point. It's fascinating to think about how these private reflections might have stayed under wraps. Lewis's thoughts give us a unique window into his daily life and relationships.
All right. The next entry is Sunday, December 17th. He says, I dreamed in the night that the doc was, quote, vaccinating Baker. He's talking about Leo Baker, his friend here that he's known from early on now at his time at Oxford. He says, I came into a room and found the patient lying nude on a hearth rug. The doctor was using an instrument like a spanner, which was not screwed together, but sprang together under the pressure of a trigger. The operation in my mind was understood to be vaccination, though at the same time, castration. I fled from the room and I woke. Wow, what a strange dream. Robot Lady, what is a spanner here? What can you describe this piece of equipment that
I'm
you might
sorry,
be talking about?
but you've hit the daily limit for advanced voice. You can switch to standard now to keep chatting.
All right, Robot Lady, are you there?
I'm here, Jeff. Ready when you are.
Did you hear what I read about Lewis's dream that he just recounted in this diary entry from Sunday, December 17th?
I haven't heard it yet. What did Lewis say about his dream in that entry?
All right, I'll just read it again so that you can catch up. He says, I dreamed in the night that the doc is Mrs. Moore's brother, was vaccinating, quote unquote, Baker, Leo Baker here he's speaking of. I came into a room and found the patient lying nude on a hearthrug. The doc was using an instrument like a spanner, S-P-A-N-N-E-R, which was not screwed together but sprang together at the pressure of a trigger. The operation in my mind was understood to be vaccination, though at the same time castration. I fled from the room and I woke. So, Robot Lady, I was just asking what a spanner is, this tool. Can you describe it to us?
A spanner is a tool similar to what Americans call a wrench. It's used for turning bolts or nuts, often with a fixed U-shaped opening at one end. It seems Lewis is describing it as a tool with some spring action, almost like a clamp or something more specialized. Interesting choice for his dream.
Yeah, and speaking of his dream, that's also a very odd dream. I don't know what that might represent, but it seems like Lewis perhaps has a little vaccine hesitancy somewhere in his subconscious.
It's definitely a strange dream. The mix of vaccination and castration could symbolize fear of loss or control. Maybe Lewis was processing some anxieties about personal vulnerability or autonomy. The dream might not directly indicate vaccine hesitancy, but it does suggest some unsettling thoughts.
Yeah, I was being a little tongue-in-cheek there, Robot Lady, but I appreciate your analysis. He continues, "It was a miraculously bright morning. After breakfast, I walked up to Hillsborough, where I found Father Raymond engaged in dogging." He's got dogging in quotes here. I'll pause for just a second. Just a reminder, Father Raymond is the owner of this house in Hillsborough where Mrs. Moore, Lewis, and Maureen stayed at no monetary expense over the summer of 1922. And at the same time, they were essentially renting the house that they're now currently in out to, I can't remember who it was, but it was someone at Oxford, maybe one of his tutors.
So, Father Raymond seems to be engaged in something unusual, or at least something Lewis felt needed a comment. Dogging, in quotes, might be Lewis's way of highlighting something peculiar or notable about Father Raymond's activities. What's he referring to here?
Yeah, I'm not sure yet, but this is just a reminder that that's who Father Raymond is, the one who graciously, quote unquote, allowed them to stay for free at their house in Hillsborough over the summer so that they could take in a little bit of income from the other house, or that they could offset the rent that they were paying at their other house, while they had a couple stay at their other house and pay them for it. Let's see, there was one other thing that I wanted to say there. Oh, just that Father Raymond found other ways to charge them. Basically listening, if I remember right, to some of his inane dialogue, and I think a point that Nitalate made a week or so ago, saying he also charged them and having them help make jam while they were there.
That's right. Father Raymond seemed to use his generosity as a way to extract things in return, whether through odd tasks like jam making or, as you pointed out, some questionable conversations. It sounds like Lewis was already skeptical of the whole arrangement, given his sense of how things were paid for indirectly. Definitely an interesting dynamic.
All right, let's see if there's any hints here as to what he means by dogging. He says, "I stood by the kennel and listened to him for a few minutes." Okay, so it's literally something to do with dogs, it sounds like, unless Lewis is just continuing to speak metaphorically here. So I stood by the kennel and listened to him for a few minutes until Mrs. Raymond appeared and we retired to the drawing room. I then broached the subject of the house. The answer was a series of uncertainties. Mr. Raymond does not know when he will leave, nor where his new job will be. If his new place offers a good house, they will move thither. If not, they will keep Hillsborough, and he will live in rooms. Or again, they may let it furnished, and so on. The only fact that I could get was that he would sell for £1,200 and let for £75, and that he would rather sell than let. After a little talk on politics, I came away. Having reached home again and giving my report, I wrote a little until I stopped by Maureen's practicing in the next room. After lunchtime, the doc arrived and we all prepared for execution. Maureen keeping up a torrent of comic relief. The doc used a sterilized nail file and the scullery for a theater. We were all done, including Dorothy. Maureen apparently has the thickest skin, and the doc was a long time scraping her, which she bore with admirable stoicism. When my turn came, I found it less painful than it looked. So his dreaming about the upcoming vaccine has finally now turned into real life, and it didn't go the way that his dream went, thankfully.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
No worries, Robot Lady. Let's jump into the next diary entry here. Monday, December 18th, he says, very tired again this morning. I dreamed in the night that my father had taken one of the paper shops at the bottom of Divinity Road, and Leo Baker had taken the other. The dream turned mainly on my efforts to avoid being seen by my father when I went into Baker's shop for a chat across the counter. So the secrecy that Lewis is keeping with his father, or away from his father, I should say, the secrets he's keeping from his father continue to weigh on Lewis, as evidenced by his dreams. What do you think, Robot Lady? Do you remember what secret he's keeping from his father? I feel like I'm Dora.
Yes, Lewis is definitely feeling the weight of his relationship with his father. He's likely hiding his deeper personal struggles, possibly around his faith or his academic choices, as he had a strained relationship with his father, who didn't approve of many of his pursuits. The secrecy in his dream could reflect that ongoing tension and his desire to maintain some autonomy from his father.
That is a good guess, Robot Lady. But actually, the thing that he's hiding from his father is the fact that he's living with Mrs. Moore, his deceased friend's mother, and he's actually helping to support her household. He's actually taking the money that his father is giving him to help support his studies at Oxford, and he's using whatever he can save to help pay for anything and everything around the house. So that's what he's hiding from his father.
That makes much more sense. Lewis is likely feeling guilty about this situation, especially since his father probably wouldn't approve of him supporting Mrs. Moore, and especially not using money meant for his studies. The secrecy in the dream seems to reflect his inner conflict about his responsibilities and how he's trying to keep this hidden from his father.
Exactly, Robot Lady. All right, he goes on to say, after breakfast, I went to the Union and started Chapman's Bussy d'Amboise, of which I couldn't make head or tail, partly because it is such an execrable drivel, partly because I was feeling so poorly. In the end, I gave it up and came home with a volume of Middleton and a headache. Mrs. Moore and Maureen had gone into town independently and were still out. After lunch, I read The Changeling in the drawing room, and here's got a footnote that this is Thomas Middleton and William Rowley's The Changeling, published 1653. All right, Robot Lady, about these two works, I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit. First one, Bussy d'Amboise, and then secondly, The Changeling, or just Changeling. Can you tell us about those two works?
Certainly, Bussy d'Amboise is a tragedy by George Chapman, first published in 1607. It's about the life of the French nobleman Bussy d'Amboise, involving themes of honor, betrayal, and revenge. Chapman's style, marked by his florid language, can feel over the top and difficult to follow, which explains why Lewis wasn't impressed. As for The Changeling, it's a dark tragicomedy by Thomas Middleton and William Rowley, published in 1653. It centers on deceit, obsession, and betrayal, revolving around a young woman named Beatrice, who is entangled in a love affair leading to murder. It's a mix of psychological tension and moral ambiguity, often considered a disturbing exploration of human nature. It seems like Lewis wasn't in the mood for the first work, and the second one was a bit more to his liking, judging by the way he spent his afternoon.
Well, you would think so, Robot Lady, but here's what he has to say about The Changeling. He says, next to Bussy d'Amboise, it's the worst Elizabethan play I have read, but it has one good scene. I'm wondering if any Elizabethan except Shakespeare ever thought of writing, except on adultery. Afterwards, I began Women Beware Women, which is very good and made ample amends. And here he's talking about another work by Thomas Middleton, published 1657. Tell us about Women Beware Women, Robot Lady.
It seems like Lewis had mixed feelings about The Changeling, but I get why he appreciated Beware Women. Beware Women is another play by Thomas Middleton, first published in 1657. It's a Jacobean tragedy that explores the complexities of marriage, infidelity, and revenge. The plot centers on the consequences of a woman's desire for power and control, leading to a web of intrigue, betrayal, and murder. It's known for its sharp wit and dark themes, much like The Changeling, but with more engaging characters and a more tightly constructed story, which is probably why Lewis thought it made ample amends.
The last thing he has to say about Women Beware Women is, quote, every now and then it actually has a line that scans. And that's his final say on that. He goes on to say at tea, Mrs. Moore told me that Dorothy's family are all furious with her for having been vaccinated. Oh, wow. Some things never seem to change, Robot Lady.
Lewis's comment on Beware Women really shows his dry humor, doesn't it? It's fascinating how critical he could be while acknowledging small merits. As for Dorothy's vaccination, that's intriguing. It sounds like her family was strongly opposed to it. Given the context of the time and Lewis's own thoughts on vaccination in his dreams, this could be a moment where he relates his own sense of discomfort with societal pressures regarding vaccination.
Yeah, it's very interesting. What were they being vaccinated for back then, Robot Lady, if you were to guess at this context in 1922? I know that there was some kind of Spanish flu, at least in the Americas, if I'm remembering right, around 1920, but I forget. I think we read about what this was a while back, but what are they getting vaccinated for, do you think?
You're right about the Spanish flu, which was still a lingering concern around 1920, especially in the wake of the global pandemic that started in 1918. However, by 1922, other vaccinations were becoming more widespread, like for smallpox, which had been a significant focus of public health campaigns. It's possible Dorothy was vaccinated for smallpox or another infectious disease that was common at the time, such as diphtheria or typhoid fever. The general sense of resistance to vaccinations, especially if it conflicted with personal or familial beliefs, could explain why her family was upset.
Thank you for that context, Robot Lady. After tea, he says, I was just going to go out when Mrs. Moore remembered that Smudge was coming for a lesson. I continued reading until she came, and then did Tacitus with her until 8 o'clock, when we had supper. Mrs. Moore's pretty well today. That's the end of that entry. We're on now to December 21st, a Thursday. We're getting close to Christmas, Robot Lady. I then came to the Union and wrote to Baker and to my father. This done, I went round to the bookshops to choose a present for the latter, and after some difficulty fixed on what the judge thought. This is another work, it says here, by a person named Edward Abbott Harry, published 1922. He says it's a rather bad book for a present, as it cost a guinea and looks worth 12 shillings. But it is the sort of thing I think he might read. My arm worried me rather more this morning. I bet his arm's hurting from the vaccination, maybe, Robot Lady? Anyway, two things. Tell us a little bit about what the judge thought. Oh, Robot Lady, you're already concocting an answer.
It's possible that Lewis's arm discomfort was a lingering effect from his vaccination, especially if he had received one recently. It sounds like he was dealing with both physical pain and a bit of frustration, choosing a gift for his father that he wasn't entirely happy with. As for what the judge thought, it seems like a book by Edward Abbott Harry from 1922, likely a social or legal commentary. Lewis's somewhat critical view of the gift, feeling it didn't match its price or quality, fits with his tendency to be discerning and a bit cynical about such things.
Well, okay, thank you, Robot Lady. The other point that I wanted to ask you what the judge thought was about, and I was just rereading what I read here as you were responding, so I wasn't paying attention to what you were saying. Did you already tell us what the judge thought is about?
No problem, Jeff. I didn't mention what the judge thought is about yet. Based on the title and the context of the time, it's likely a work dealing with legal or moral issues, possibly exploring the judgments and perspectives of judges or societal attitudes toward justice. It may have been a commentary or social critique. Given that Lewis thought it was something his father might read, it's probably not a very thrilling read, but more of a thoughtful or analytical book on law or ethics. I'd be happy to look it up further if you want more details.
No, that's fine. Thanks for that, Robot Lady, because it makes more sense since Lewis's dad was a solicitor or an attorney. The other thing that's just notable here to me is he says that he wrote to Baker and to his father, but we don't have any evidence of a letter to either of those two in the collected volume of letters that I'm working through at this time period. When I last checked, the next letter that we have on record that C.S. Lewis wrote to anyone was not until April of 1923. So I'm not sure if he ever sent these letters, or if he did, if they were ever found. So either way,
That's a really interesting observation, Jeff. It's quite possible that those letters were either lost, never sent, or simply didn't survive. Sometimes letters from that time don't make it into the collected volumes, either because they weren't deemed significant enough for inclusion or respondents' habits. The gap you mentioned between December 1922 and April 1923 also suggests that Lewis might have been in a period of less active correspondence, which could explain the absence of those letters in the collection. It's fascinating to think about how much of his personal communication might have been lost to time.
Well, and it's worth just double checking here in the collected letters. So let me just go back and take a look and make sure that I am remembering this correctly, because he wrote a letter to his father back in October of 1922. And yeah, that's the last thing that we have here in this collection of letters, volume 1 from Walter Hooper. So yeah, to your point, they might not have ever been sent, or they might have just been lost to history, or they might not have been considered important enough to include in the collection. All right, thanks for that, Robot Lady. Let's continue with the diary entry here. He says, I then came home after lunch. I went into the drawing room and started my table for the 19th century. Mrs. Moore worked very hard in the dining room, putting up parcels for all her poor pensioners. We had tea at 5:45, alone, Maureen having gone to play progressive bridge at the Taylors'. That's where we are so far in this diary entry, Robot Lady. Any thoughts?
It seems like Lewis's day was filled with routine, but also with a sense of responsibility toward others. His work on his Table for the 19th Century might be a reference to academic or personal research, showing his commitment to intellectual pursuits even during the holiday season. Meanwhile, Mrs. Moore's efforts with the parcels for her pensioners demonstrate her generosity and perhaps a kind of practical concern for the community. The quietness of tea with just Maureen absent might also hint at some loneliness or separation, as Lewis navigates his home life while Maureen is socializing elsewhere. It's interesting how he balances his scholarly work with these domestic and social duties.
It is, Robot Lady. Yeah, maybe this table is something that he's using to help him with his studies. We were both in as good form as could be expected, with this wretched Irish visit hanging over us. Interesting. Not sure what he's talking about there. In the evening came Smudge, all very merry at supper. Afterwards, I did Latin with her, and I was not in bed till nearly 1. Sheesh, burning the midnight oil. All right, that's the end of that diary entry, Robot Lady. We're going to jump into December 22nd, 1922.
Got it. That line about the wretched Irish visit is intriguing. It could refer to some sort of upcoming or unresolved visit or situation involving Ireland or someone from Ireland, but Lewis doesn't seem to be thrilled about it. Maybe it was a visit that he found burdensome or stressful. It could be something personal or tied to his work. Either way, it sounds like it's weighing on him a bit. Now, moving on to December 22nd, 1922. Let's dive in whenever you're ready.
All right, he says, my arm has thoroughly taken by now and is pretty sore, although nothing compared to Maureen's. So it looks like they're both experiencing some fallout from their vaccinations, just, the common soreness that comes with things like that. After breakfast, which was very late, I went on with my table for a little while, then finding that Sainsbury ceased to give dates as he got near the present day. I bust into the Union and did some research on the 80-ish crowd. So I'm not sure what he's talking about here, Robot Lady. Any thoughts?
It sounds like Lewis might be working on something historical or literary, maybe creating a timeline or a table of events, which is why he refers to my table. The mention of Sainsbury's could be a reference to a book or a source, and the idea that it ceased to give dates as he got near the present day suggests that Lewis is studying a work that was losing its relevance or precision as it approached more recent events. The 80-ish crowd is a bit unclear, but perhaps it's a demographic or age group he's researching, maybe historical figures, philosophers, or individuals from a certain period. He might be doing some background research, possibly for his work on the 19th century that he mentioned before. Does that align with what you've been seeing in his work lately?
Yeah, looking at it again, I think you're right, Robot Lady. He's just still working on this table that he mentioned before, this 19th century table. He continues, the doc was here for lunch. He gave us an account of the awful clothes that his father had made him wear as a boy. He had had a fad for, quote, government flannel, end quote, and fitted all his sons out with thick gray shirts of that prickly material. Mrs. Moore said their father had been a very good man, really, and disagreeable nowhere except at home. The doc agreed. It's an interesting insight into Mrs. Moore's father and her family life as a child. I got him to talk traveler's talk. He described a sail in the iceberg.
It is indeed. The mention of government flannel and the way Mrs. Moore reflects on her father's character provide a fascinating glimpse into her upbringing. It sounds like her father might have been strict or exacting at home, but with a softer side outside of it. The contrast between her father's public demeanor and his private actions shows a complexity to her family life, perhaps influencing her personality and views later in life. This also adds depth to her relationship with Lewis, giving more context to her background. What do you make of Mrs. Moore's comment about her father being really a good man?
I think that in general is probably a common response whenever two siblings are talking about their parents, where you might have one rush to the defense of their parents in some way to not paint them completely as all bad or in a negative light. Whenever perhaps another sibling or a family member has done something like that.
That's a great point. It's a natural instinct to defend one's parents, especially when there's been any criticism or negative discussion. It might be Mrs. Moore's way of balancing the narrative and perhaps protecting the family reputation or her own feelings toward him, even if the relationship was complex. Do you think her defense of her father speaks to her broader character or attitudes in any way?
I don't, probably not. Just not specifically her broader character necessarily. He goes on to say, I got the doc, that's Mrs. Moore's brother, to talk traveler's talk. He described a sail in the iceberg regions, bergs, one after the other, like tents in a camp, stretching as far as you could see, in tremendous sunshine. He said one of the best places he'd ever seen was the Straits of Magellan. He said it really gave you the feeling of the world's end. We talked, this is an interesting historical note here, Robot Lady. I know it's been several years since it happened, but he says, we talked of the wreck of the Titanic. He said when the captain saw the berg ahead, he should have kept straight on. In that case, he would have smashed his bows, but as the impact lessened, he would have come up against the first watertight bulkhead, and the rest of the ship would have been safe. It is, as it was, he put his helm hard down in a hopeless effort to get round the berg, and so got his whole side ripped up. Which, if you've seen James Cameron's Titanic, you get to see this the recreation or dramatization of precisely what he's talking about there.
That's a fascinating detail. It's interesting to see that even in the 1920s, people were already reflecting on the Titanic disaster with some hindsight and offering opinions on what might have changed the outcome. It's a historical perspective that contrasts with the dramatized versions we know today, like the Titanic movie. Lewis is getting this insight from someone who may have had more first-hand experience or knowledge about sea travel. What do you think it says about the doc's perspective on risk and decision-making in critical moments?
Oh, I'm not sure, Robot Lady. That's an interesting question. He says, Mrs. Moore and I were alone for tea. Afterwards, I walked down Cowley Road and bought a razor blade. I sat up pretty late in the evening talking over this last year and what bad times we had, especially its beginning and the cursed visit of the Askins and their patient efforts to ruin my schools, and what was more important, Mrs. Moore's health. I'll do one more diary entry, Robot Lady, and then I have to end things today. This next one is relatively long, so let's get right to it. Saturday, December 23rd. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's dive into December 23rd, 1922.
All right, up betimes, having packed the night before and left home immediately after breakfast. I caught the 10:30, a beautiful sunny morning. I was met at Paddington by Baker, who seemed well and cheerful. For some reason, we found that we had very little to say to each other, though not for lack of will on each side. He told me that Barfield, this is Owen Barfield, their mutual friend, and Leo Baker was the person that introduced them. He says Barfield was engaged to be married to Miss Dewey. This is Miss Douie, it says, who was at least 37. We both agreed that the possibilities of success in such unequal marriage depended entirely on the individuals, and it might turn out very well. He said the pity was that there could be no children, and Barfield was obviously made to be a father. I saw no reason why a woman under 40 should not have a child. Very interesting. He took me to, Robot Lady, what do you think about all that?
That's quite an intriguing conversation. It seems like both C.S. Lewis and Baker are considering the dynamics of age and family in relationships, with Lewis expressing a more open perspective on women having children later in life. It also offers some insight into Barfield's situation and his qualities. What do you make of Lewis's thoughts on it?
Well, I think it's interesting. It seems like even back in 1922 that they believed, I think, as is a common belief today and probably backed up by some medical study, I would presume. I'd say it's the standing assumption, at least in my mind and from what I've heard from other people, that once you start getting into your mid to late 30s as a woman, there becomes more and more risk involved with pregnancy, and so it seems like they knew that even back then, and that at least Baker was aware of it, but it sounds like perhaps C.S. Lewis wasn't. You still there, Robot Lady?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
All right, let me finish this diary entry. It seems that Lucy is hell-bent on attacking everything here at the desk towards the end of this episode. Okay. Nope, stop.
Sounds like Lucy's getting a bit feisty. Hopefully she calms down soon. Feel free to finish up when you're ready, and we can dive back into the diary entry.
All right, thanks, Robot Lady. I see Peter Penrose Bach has joined us as well. I see you in the chat, Peter. Good to have you here. Thanks for joining. We are just finishing up this episode with our diary entry from December 23rd, a Saturday, 1922. He goes on to say about Baker, he took me to the flat, which he shares with Beckett, a very tiny place in a large block of similar ones, which are mostly inhabited by the mistresses of great men. Baker is getting on excellently at the Old Vic and has had encouraging messages from, quote, in front, end quote. He is now doing Herod's Chancellor in their nativity play. So Baker, yes, here's a reminder, is pursuing acting. And Robot Lady, I think, I'm not really sure, but Lewis had mentioned some kind of trip to Ireland, and I think prior to that he had talked about meeting up with his brother to go back there. So perhaps that's the trip that he's on right now, heading back to Ireland. So let's see if that's what actually happens.
That makes sense. Lewis does seem to be on a journey, perhaps heading back to Ireland, or at least making a trip away from home. It's interesting that he's reflecting on Baker's career progress. Acting at the Old Vic must have been a significant step.
Lewis goes on to say about Baker, I tried to get his views on Moppy, and you can look back on previous episodes to find out who Moppy is. He said his aunt had seen at once that truthfulness was not one of Moppy's virtues, and was afraid we might be deceived over the main issue. He could give no explanation how she had spent so much money in London, as he had paid everything. So it's interesting that this Moppy character was perhaps not as pure and believable, or to be believed, as Lewis and Mrs. Moore initially thought that she should be. She very much cast herself in the light of a victim as it related to her family, but maybe not necessarily all of what she had to say was 100% true. He says at 12:30 we went out and lunched at the Good Intent. We then tubed to Charing Cross, where he had to leave me after a most disappointing meeting. I then wrote a card to Mrs. Moore. I got my ticket, and I strolled about Inslee Square, where I had been in hospital back in 1918. Interesting. So this is where he was convalescing from his war injuries. He says, shortly before 4, I returned to the Central Hall at Euston, and there was met by Warney, this is his brother, when we immediately went and had tea in the refreshment room. He gave a most favorable account of Colchester, which he said was a very old worn town in an Arthur Rackham country. We caught the 5:30 for Liverpool. What between dinner, drinks, and conversation, the journey passed very quickly. We succeeded in sitting in the dining car the whole way. We had 2 single berth rooms in the boat with a communicating door. I was greatly worried all day by the pain in my armpit. A rough night, but we both slept well. So I'm not sure if this is tied to the vaccine that he received a couple of days ago, or if it was the wound from the war, because he has shrapnel kind of stuck up underneath his armpit from that wound that he suffered that basically got him out of the army. So I'm not sure if he's talking about one or both of those things affecting him here. But that's the end of the diary entry, Robot Lady. Any thoughts before we shut things down today?
It's hard to say definitively, but given his history with the shrapnel wound, it's likely the pain is related to that. It could be a lingering issue from the war injury, especially since he's had trouble with it before. The mention of the vaccine soreness seems to be a separate matter.
Yeah, it really does, doesn't it, Robot Lady? All right. That's actually beyond the time that I have for today, so I'm going to have to end things rather abruptly. Anything that you'd like to say in closing, Robot Lady, before we're finished for the day?
I think we've covered a lot today, Jeff. It's always interesting to see how C.S. Lewis reflects on his personal life and relationships through his diaries. Looking forward to where we pick up next time.
Awesome. Thank you, Robot Lady, for your help as usual. And thank you, Ron, Nidalate, and Peter for joining us today, and everyone else who's joined either now live or later on recording. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, and as always, your participation. It's much appreciated. Until next time, when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis together, everyone, within the sound of my voice, take care.
Break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold. Insights and secrets, ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set flavor beats in our minds, they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set flavor beats in our minds, they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape lands. Engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's lands. Engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From Narnia's lands